Hello listeners and welcome to the Montel Weekly podcast, bringing energy matters in an informal setting. In today's pod, we turn our attention to Europe's Guarantee of Origin market. For some, GOs are the most efficient way of verifying renewable electricity output, while others say the system is open to abuse and should be reformed. Norway's new government caused concerns recently when it announced that it planned to exit the scheme. Helping me, Richard Sverrisson, to discuss the key issues in the Guarantees of Origin market is Adam White of Rex International. A warm welcome to you, Adam.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks for having me.
I think we should start really by discussing the bombshell dropped by the Norwegian government. Did that come as a surprise, Adam?
I mean, yes and no. We knew that the Labour Party in Norway had this position for a relatively long time, and having won the election even without a majority, as I understand it, they sought to start to implement their policy program. I think it does sound like a dramatic announcement, but we are staying calm about it. We're encouraging our members to stay calm about it. Nothing can change overnight. Obviously, Norway is subject to European law and the Renewable Energy Directive and Article 19 of that directive, which sets out rules on what member states and other EEA countries need to do in terms of guarantees of origin. I don't think anyone thinks that Norway is going to drop out of respecting that kind of law. So things may start to change, but we don't think it's going to be a dramatic full exit of the Guarantee of Origin scheme, as may have initially been heard in following the announcement.
What are the reasons for the Labour Party taking this position? Is it quite critical of GOs as a way of verifying renewable energy, or has it listened more to industry in Norway, which has always been very critical of the system, and not to the utilities?
I mean, my understanding is that it really comes from large Norwegian energy consumers, most kind of typically the aluminium smelters who use a lot of electricity in Norway, obviously, for their manufacturing. And I think their feeling is, well, we produce a lot of hydro energy in Norway, and that kind of by right belongs to us, and so we can claim to be using renewable energy whether or not we're buying the guarantees of origin. Unfortunately, that's just not how the system works. What we call the production mix in Norway, so what's actually produced in the country, is very renewable, but the consumption mix, which is what is consumed based on guarantees of origin, is pretty much the same as Germany. So the consumers in Norway, just like any other European consumer, if they want to say they're using renewable energy, have to be cancelling the guarantees of origin that go with that. I really think that is the easiest solution to this situation, that all Norwegian consumers, they might not be happy that the guarantees of origin that come from their hydro production are exported in very large numbers into the European market for European consumers who want to claim that renewable energy. But they have equal opportunity to buy those guarantees of origin. Arguably, they're of most value to Norwegian consumers because they are their local production, and that has its own kind of cachet and benefit. And they're, in fact, the least expensive, often, guarantees of origin on the market. So, Norwegian consumers could get greatest value for relatively low cost, and they should be buying the guarantees of origin if they want to claim that renewable energy.
But for them, I suppose it's an unnecessary extra cost.
Well, unnecessary, it depends on your viewpoint. It's necessary according to European law, and they are subject to European law as an EEA country. So it is a necessary cost for them if they want to claim the renewable energy.
What form could this exit from the GO market take then, Adam? You don't seem to be convinced that there's going to be a total exit. What's your view of the way forward for the Norwegian government, given its legal constraints as well?
If we take the starting position that they're not going to derogate from EU law on this, because that would have wider implications for their status as an EEA country in general, then they are required under Article 19 to maintain a guarantee of origin system and issue guarantees of origin based on requests from producers. So the next question is, like you say, what could they do to change their relationship with the wider European market on guarantees of origin? And a first step that I've heard discussed could be that they might leave the AIB, the Association of Issuing Bodies, which is a voluntary organization for the national issuing bodies of guarantees of origin, to come together and discuss the kind of latest developments, to share experiences, to learn from each other, and also to develop and maintain the European Energy Certificate Scheme rules, which is a quite detailed rule book on how AIB EECS GO schemes should be run. They could leave that, like any country could leave that. There are most European countries, single market countries and EEA countries are members of the AIB. I think they benefit greatly from it, but not all. Poland, for example, isn't. The UK wasn't when it was still a member of the EU. So, that could happen. And that could slow down the flow of GOs from Norway into the European market, because another major benefit of being an AIB member is that you can transfer your GOs through a hub, which greatly facilitates inter-country trade of GOs. So that's one thing they could do. I think that would be a retrograde step, obviously, because of the benefits of AIB membership, like I've discussed. And there are other things that Norway could do domestically whilst maintaining a GO scheme, whilst being a member of the AIB, to encourage domestic consumption of their GOs. They could offer tax breaks, for example, to consumers of Norwegian European energy. Like I said, the cost of a Norwegian hydro GO is not particularly high, so it shouldn't take too much persuasion to explain to Norwegian consumers that you get great benefit from buying these GOs more than any other European consumer, arguably, and we can support you in making sure that you're supporting the production of Norwegian renewable energy by consuming it yourselves.
I think that's going to be quite some task, persuading these big industrial users of energy to buy GOs, but certainly that's an option. What do you think the impact will be on the wider market then, Adam? I mean, do you expect then the flow of GOs from Norway to the continent to come to a halt, or sort of trickle right down? I mean, what do you expect here?
No, I don't expect it ever to come to a complete halt. It may start to slow down. I wouldn't want to be making too bold a prediction on that either, though. I think, as a whole, Norwegian GOs are a big part of the market, and as I understand it from our members, they do provide kind of a base liquidity to the market as a whole. So they serve an important market function, and that liquidity is important in GO markets. It is relatively limited. So if there was a significant reduction of Nordic hydro GOs, that could have a kind of a knock-on effect on contracts in general, which not depend but do benefit from the liquidity that the hydro GOs from Norway provide to the market in general. So that could have a negative effect that we would like to avoid. We're doing the utmost we can to maintain and increase liquidity in the market. So any reduction in that would be of concern. Having said that, as in terms of the different product groups for GOs in the market, the Nordic hydro do tend to be the longest segment of the market. So we know that the GO market has historically been oversupplied or long in general. When RICS International looked into this in a bit more detail earlier this year, it's relatively clear, it's quite clear from the AIB statistics that it's really the hydro segment and the biomass segment that are the longest, and actually the wind and solar segments are quite short and in most demand, therefore. And so it's not like the supply of hydro GOs from Norway would have a major effect. Slowing it down wouldn't necessarily have a major effect in pure supply and demand terms, because the supply is already greater than the demand for it.
And how about the attractiveness of Norway as a base for industry? I mean, the tech companies or data centers, if there are changes to the rules for guarantees of origin, I mean, is Norway going to attract those kind of companies?
Well, I mean, any major corporation that wants to claim the use of renewable energy as any consumer needs to be able to prove that. And in Europe, that means cancelling GOs. And that's not only the law, that's also for voluntary disclosure schemes like CDP and RE100. So, there's no way a big corporate who reports on their renewable energy consumption would voluntarily, I think, go to a country where they can't do that, where they'd have a large amount of their consumption that wouldn't really be verifiable by groups like CDP. And so for me, that would be a retrograde step for Norway as well, that they would limit the capacity to attract new manufacturers, new energy consumers who would require the presence of a GO scheme in order to be able to report their consumption.
So in a sense, Norway's sort of shooting itself in the foot, really.
Well, I definitely think that Norway would be the country most negatively affected by curtailing its GO scheme. Yeah.
Okay, Adam. Let's look more at sort of current market dynamics in the GO system. What are driving prices at the moment?
We have seen that there are, big price increases in the last few weeks and couple of months, and there was a bit of a drop off, and then they're picking up again. And my understanding, we're not a market player at Rex International, we represent market participants. My understanding is that this is really becoming a structural increase in market activity. There's more and more demand from more and more consumers, and that's what's driving the price. That there is many more transactions being made. There's, like I said, more interest in consuming renewable energy, and that's really where Rex International's focus is on supporting that growing demand. And that's at both ends of the market. There are some well-established market participants who are becoming more and more sophisticated in the types of renewable energy they're choosing, the products they're choosing, and even driving the development of new products at which we might talk about, temporally granular guarantees of origin and so on. But also there's massive opportunities still at the other end of the market where energy consumers might be new to buying renewable energy and wanting to buy that in a simple and secure way, and that we see them also coming in. Yeah, in general, we feel that the increasing interest and the price rises are structural and based on growing demand for renewables, which is obviously a positive thing for everybody.
In the past, I've heard, people criticize the GO market for being, not very transparent, being illiquid, and maybe immature in many aspects, very volatile. Would you say that that's the case these days, or is there quite a difference in today's GO market compared to a few years ago?
I mean, I think it's becoming increasingly mature. I think we see it's a well-established market that's been around for a long time. It is becoming increasingly transparent. Some of the national auctions have helped with price transparency, for example. So we see auctions with published prices in Portugal, in France, Croatia, and Italy, and Luxembourg. So those are already giving a pretty good indication of prices. There's discussion of setting up exchanges for GOs, which could complicate the market in some ways, but it can also help to provide a clear price signal and increase liquidity, which could have some positive benefits too. So, I mean, I definitely see the market maturing. And like I said, it has scope to mature at both ends with more complex products available where consumers want them, and also greater availability of GOs, greater ease of buying GOs for consumers who want to enter the voluntary renewable energy market. Because at the end of the day, there's no requirement to buy renewable energy. Obviously, in Europe at least, there are in some energy attribute certificate markets like in North America, but here it's really a voluntary market. So we do have to respond to the needs and the desires of consumers in order to ensure that we keep lifting that demand up.
Adam, you mentioned exchanges, plural. Are there plans for several exchanges for GOs, and is there enough liquidity in the market to justify a difference in or several marketplaces?
No, that was probably, I probably misspoke. An exchange that I'm aware of at the moment, yeah.
Are you seeing more interest towards wind and solar GOs instead of hydro in terms of supporting new capacity? Is that something that's happening out there?
Yeah, definitely. And this is a bit like I was talking about before, that where often we see consumers enter the market in the kind of the easiest way, which is probably buying unbundled generic GOs or Nordic hydro GOs, which are the most liquid, the most available, the least expensive end of the market. But then as they participate in the market for a number of years or a bit of time, they look to refine their buying choices in much the same way as consumers of any product do. And they either look to buy GOs from production that's more geographically local to them, or particular product segments like you say, like solar or wind. And we do see more and more pressure in those areas. And I think this is often reflected in price differences. There are quite large price ranges, even on publicly available prices, between different GO products. And that really reflects supply and demand for those different product segments. And like I said, in the report we published earlier this year, we see most demand for wind and solar, and that is where the supply demand is most in equilibrium. and therefore prices have started to rise in a structural way in those market segments. And it could be that products, as I've said, get more and more sophisticated as particularly at the kind of the cutting edge of the geo market, the likes of Google and Microsoft and Facebook, where they run big data centers and they have a big data capacity, are looking to buy GOs from production that happened at the same time as their consumption was happening. Now, that's a relatively difficult thing to do, and it's obviously not for everybody. We would never ever advocate it to be for everybody. But where consumers want that and where producers and issuing bodies can provide that information, then that can be a great way of adding value to GOs as well. And another aspect of that kind of added granularity is the potential to add CO2 values to each guarantee of origin. So the CO2 value of the production of the megawatt hour that's represented in the guarantee of origin. Obviously, for wind and solar, that's not such an important piece of information, but maybe for hydro or bioenergy, particularly biogases, that can be a very valuable piece of information. And so adding granularity and sophistication in buying choices there can also be an interesting dynamic in the market.
We're also going to be seeing the revised Renewable Energy Directive and the discussion around that. What are the implications there for guarantees of origin, Adam? What's being discussed there?
The Commission have made its proposal, obviously, and it's gone to the Parliament and the Council now. The biggest change that the Commission proposed was requiring the issuance of guarantees of origin for all renewable energy generation. So in the current RED II that is still obviously in force, countries had the option not to issue guarantees of origin to producers that benefit from a public support scheme. And most clearly this happened in Germany, basically, where those producers benefiting from the relatively generous German support for renewable energies were not able to request the issuance of a guarantee of origin. Now, if that proposal from the Commission were maintained by the Council and Parliament and into the final law, that could change things relatively significantly in Germany and therefore for the market as a whole, because there is a significant chunk of renewable energy generation in Europe that goes uncertified, mainly for regulatory, but also sometimes for market reasons. And that would obviously bring that supply in. And we do support this because we see it as a step towards certifying the generation of all energy and a step towards full disclosure. Now, full disclosure is where all energy generation or consumption is certified, and so no one is making a claim based on the residual mix, so what is left from the production mix after the certified mix is taken out. And there are different ways of doing full disclosure. It's not a kind of a one-size-fits-all, and the members of REX International have supported full consumption disclosure, which is really what they have put in place in the Netherlands as kind of the best option. And that is where every megawatt hour of energy consumed needs to have an EAC or a guarantee of origin cancelled for it in order to prove where that energy came from. And we think that's important for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it levels the playing field, because at the moment it's only consumers of renewable energy who need to cancel a certificate to prove that consumption. And also it really makes everyone conscious of the energy they're consuming. If you have to cancel a certificate against your consumption and you were assuming to yourself that you were consuming relatively clean energy without really paying too much attention to it, well, if you're confronted by a certificate that says, no, this was coal production from an old plant in, somewhere quite a long way away, you might think, oh, actually, that's not what I want to be doing. I'm going to make a more conscious choice about where my energy is coming from.
So is this linked to also some schemes and some measures we're seeing in recent months about 24/7 tracking of GOs rather than reporting it on a live basis, real-time basis, rather than an annual basis? Is this sort of linked to that, Adam?
Not directly. So full disclosure is really about the certification of all energy generation, whether it's renewable or not. 24/7 tracking is the idea of placing more temporal granularity on each certificate. So at the moment, when a producer requests a GO be issued for their generation, the kind of the timestamp on that GO can be up to a month, for example. It could just be a GO produced from solar in July 2020, which doesn't give the consumer much granularity about exactly when that energy was produced. some consumers, as I mentioned, particularly those with large data capacity, the internet companies, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, and so on, have said they want more temporal granularity and matching on their consumption. So they want to say, well, we consumed, this data center consumed 5 megawatt hours from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock on July 31st, 2020. We want to buy 5 megawatt hours of GOs that were produced at the same time, and often in a relatively local proximity to that consumption. And the reason they're doing that, as I understand it, is there's a number of reasons. One of which is they want to as closely match the certificates to the physical reality on the grid at the time. They feel that that gives them the most reliable form of renewable energy consumption. It's the most likely that what is coming out of their plug is closely related to what their certificates tell them they're buying. Now, you can never make that match 100%. The reason we have a certificate market is because you cannot track electrons or gas through a grid or a pipeline from production point to consumption point. That's why you have to have a certificate market. But like I said, some of the more sophisticated consumers are making these choices, which are perfectly valid for them, in an effort to make the kind of the physical reality match the certificates they're buying as closely as possible. And, we don't block that at all. We are engaged in two major initiatives, the Energy Tag Initiative and the Euroelectric 24/7 initiative, to ensure that these markets can work and they can be integrated within existing EAC schemes in Europe and elsewhere as well. And, that can, as I said, provide something that the most sophisticated consumers want.
Do you see this trend? Do you see it will continue? I mean, do you see there's a growing demand for this kind of temporal granularity, Adam?
There's definitely relatively strong interest. I would say, for my kind of best guess, it will never dominate the market, but it could be an important segment of the market. Picking up on something in your previous question as well, it's important to remember that 24/7 matching doesn't necessarily mean real-time matching. So you can still do, and it will be the case, that we will be doing retrospective matching of temporally granular certificates. So you might get, even if it's to the end of the day or the end of a week or the end of a month, look back at your consumption for every hour in that period and then match it by buying certificates for production at the same time. Real-time matching, kind of almost instantaneous matching of consumption with production through certificates. No one's sure that that's even really possible, I would say, and that's definitely a very long way off. So that it's still a kind of a retrospective product and effect in the market.
Finally, Adam, we started off by talking about a potential Norway exit from the GO system, but also I'd like to turn to the UK that's exited the EU. What can you say about the acceptance of EU GOs in the UK? What's the outlook here?
Yeah, so this all stems from part of the RED II, which says that EU member states can only trade GOs with third countries, which of course the UK is now, if there's mutual recognition of the guarantee of origin schemes between the EU EEA countries and those third countries. And that affected most immediately Switzerland and the UK. So in Switzerland's case, they do have a very sophisticated, well-functioning GO scheme. They're a member of the AIB, for example, and they were fully integrated into the European market, and now no longer are, because they don't have explicit mutual recognition of their guarantees of origin. And the same became true of the UK when Brexit was finalised. And what is challenging for those countries is that it's not clear how mutual recognition can be achieved. So it's not defined in law, and the kind of informal indications we have from the European Commission are that it has to be based on quite well-developed goods and services trade agreements, basically. So as you'll know, Switzerland had many bilateral agreements on different product and services areas with the EU. They have negotiated an interinstitutional framework agreement, which is like an overarching agreement to bring all of those into one deal. That was ratified on the EU side, but actually was never ratified on the Swiss side. And the Swiss government have put that on ice, effectively. And so the Commission have said, well, we will only discuss mutual recognition of guarantees of origin with Switzerland if and when that interinstitutional framework agreement is ratified by Switzerland. And so that gives an indication of the situation for the UK, which is where we started. And the Brexit agreement, as you know, is a very thin agreement. And at the moment, the UK, like Switzerland, in fact, have said that but even if we can't export our GOs, or in the UK's case, REGOs, to the EU market, we will continue to accept that EU GOs can be imported to the UK and Switzerland. And Switzerland have decided to do that indefinitely. The UK government has said that it will continue to seek mutual recognition. What is uncertain is how long the UK will maintain that position, basically. And so there is uncertainty in the market there. We would encourage the UK to simply maintain that. I mean, the UK is a net importer of GOs to the tune of tens of terawatt hours. And so if, for political reasons, the UK government decided to end that net import, it would have a major effect, mostly on UK consumers, blocking them from being able to choose the renewable energy of their choice. And it would have some effect on the European market too, by removing a large demand centre.
Something that we'll have to keep a very close eye on, as well as developments here in Norway. So, Adam, thanks very much for joining the Montel Weekly podcast.
Thanks very much for having me, Richard. It's been enjoyable.
So, listeners, you can now follow the podcast on our own Twitter account, aptly named the Montel Weekly Podcast. Please direct message any suggestions, questions, or, let us know if you think you have a good idea for a guest on the show. You can also send us an email to podcast@montelnews.com. Lastly, remember to keep up to date with all that's happening in energy markets on Montel News. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Thank you and goodbye.